What would drive a loving mother to commit the unthinkable? What happens when the very person sworn to protect her children becomes the architect of their deepest trauma? In a small Colorado town where everyone knew each other's names and front doors were rarely locked, a brutal double homicide shattered every illusion of safety. Sarah Beasley, a devoted mother of three, and her boyfriend, John Salazar, were found dead in what initially seemed like a home invasion gone wrong. But as the investigation unfolded, the truth shocked even the most seasoned detectives. This wasn't a crime of opportunity. It was personal, it was deliberate, and it was committed by someone far too close to home. By all appearances, Sarah Lynn Beasley was the kind of woman every small town rallied around. At 35, she was a dedicated mother to three children, ages 10, 8, and 5, a former preschool teacher turned stay-at-home mom. Sarah was known for her warm smile, home-baked cookies, and the tireless way she volunteered at school functions. After her divorce from Daniel Bessie 3 years earlier, she'd worked hard to rebuild her life, one focused on healing, stability, and the kind of peaceful home her children deserved. Her new partner, John Salazar, was a soft-spoken contractor and single father himself. They met at a community barbecue in the summer of 2011, and within a year, John had become a fixture in Sarah's life. Unlike her ex-husband Daniel, John was steady. He listened more than he talked, treated her children as his own, and, according to friends, brought a sense of calm to Sarah's otherwise stormy past. But beneath the smiling photographs on Facebook and the family hikes in the Rockies was a silent war. Sarah's ex-husband Daniel never truly let go, not emotionally, not legally, and not psychologically. The divorce may have been finalized in court, but in Daniel's mind, Sarah was still his. And if he couldn't have her, no one else should. It was January 12, 2013, a Saturday night. Snow had begun falling around 6 p.m., blanketing the quiet residential streets of Greeley, Colorado. Inside the modest split-level home Sarah rented on West 16th Street, the warmth of domestic life played out like any other evening. Sarah and John had just finished putting the kids to bed after a night of board games and hot cocoa. The couple curled up on the couch, watching The Lincoln Lawyer on Netflix. By all accounts, it was just another peaceful winter night. Until it wasn't. At 11:27 p.m., neighbors reported hearing what they described as two loud pops, followed by a child screaming. At 11:30 p.m., a frantic 911 call was placed, made not by an adult, but by Sarah's 10-year-old daughter, Lila. In the background of the call, the dispatcher could hear a small child sobbing and another whispering, "Is Mommy asleep?" When officers arrived at the home just 12 minutes later, they were met with a scene so chilling that it would haunt them for years. Sarah Beasley was found face down on the living room floor, a gunshot wound to the back of her head. John Salazar was slumped against the entryway wall, his body riddled with 2 bullets, one to the chest and one to the neck. The children were huddled upstairs in a closet, traumatized but physically unharmed. There were no signs of forced entry. Nothing appeared to be stolen. Sarah's wallet sat on the counter. John's phone was charging by the nightstand. The front door was unlocked, and the snow-covered driveway bore only one set of footprints leading up to the house and none leaving it. From the start, it was clear this wasn't a robbery. It was a targeted attack. As the detective secured the scene, one officer, a 17-year veteran named Detective Elise Romero, noticed something peculiar. The coffee table was undisturbed, the wine glasses still half full. John's body, though bloodied, was positioned almost as if he'd been turning toward the door in surprise. Whoever did this had come quickly, quietly, purposefully. Over the next 48 hours, the town of Greeley went from shaken to stunned as investigators worked through the night. Detectives began by reviewing Sarah's call history. Her last outgoing call had been to her sister, Mia, around 9:03 p.m. It had been a casual check-in. "John's helping the kids brush their teeth," she said. "We're winding down." More importantly, there was a missed call from Daniel Bessie, Sarah's ex-husband, at 10:11 p.m. No voicemail was left. Then nothing. No texts. No calls. Radio silence. When police went to inform Daniel of his ex-wife's death, they found him at home in his apartment, roughly 7 miles away. He appeared shocked, according to the official report, and genuinely distraught. But as they questioned him further, small cracks began to form in his story. Daniel claimed he'd been asleep since 9:30 p.m., that he'd had a couple of beers and dozed off in front of the TV. But a forensic check of his phone showed activity well after 10 p.m. He had opened Google Maps, searched for directions to Sarah's house, and checked the weather in Greeley. Most damning of all, a fingerprint belonging to Daniel was found on the inside handle of Sarah's front door. To outsiders, Daniel Beasley had always seemed like a decent guy, a quiet presence at school plays and soccer matches. He rarely caused a scene. But to those closer to Sarah, her sister, her best friend, and even her therapist, Daniel was a shadow she couldn't shake. He had been emotionally abusive during their marriage. Not physically violent, but always watching, always criticizing. When Sarah left him in 2010 after discovering he was cheating with a co-worker, Daniel didn't fight for the marriage. Instead, he weaponized the children, dragging Sarah into court over custody, finances, and visitation rights for nearly 3 years. Sarah often confided that Daniel would show up unannounced, that he hated John Salazar with a passion, and once told her, "If you bring that man near my kids again, I swear to God, you'll regret it." A year before the murder, Sarah had filed a police report after Daniel allegedly followed her car for miles and banged on her window when she stopped at a red light. The case was dropped due to insufficient evidence. Now, detectives saw those red flags in a new light. Interviews with Daniel's co-workers painted a picture of a man unraveling. In the weeks before the murders, he had grown increasingly agitated, distracted, and paranoid. He used to talk about how Sarah was trying to replace him. One co-worker told police, like she wanted to erase him from the kids' lives. It really messed with his head. He had also withdrawn money, $500, from his savings account on January 10th. He told the bank teller it was for an emergency. The money was never found. When police examined his laptop, they found browser searches like "How to Silence a Gun," "Untraceable Weapons Colorado," "Custody Rights After Partner's Death." On January 15th, just 3 days after the murders, Daniel was arrested and charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder, 3 counts of child abuse, and unlawful entry. The children, still in shock, were placed in the care of Sarah's sister Mia. Lila, the 10-year-old who had made the 911 call, would later testify in court, her voice trembling as she recounted the moment she heard Daddy yelling, then Mommy screaming. In his mugshot, Daniel's expression was unreadable, neither defiant nor remorseful, just empty. When Daniel Beasley entered the courtroom on April 4th, 2013, for the first day of his murder trial, the atmosphere was electric. Every seat in the Weld County Courthouse was filled. Local news vans lined the street outside, reporters jostling for a chance to capture his face, hoping for some flicker of emotion that might humanize or damn the man at the center of the town's worst tragedy in decades. The prosecution, led by veteran District Attorney Clara Hensley, wasted no time setting the tone. This was not a crime of passion, she declared in her opening statement. This was a calculated, premeditated act by a man who believed that if he couldn't control his family, he had the right to destroy it. The most heart-wrenching moment of the trial came on the 3rd day, when Sarah Beasley, now 11, took the stand. Flanked by a child advocate and holding a stuffed bear, she described in vivid, halting detail the night her mother and John Salazar were killed. "We were in bed, but I heard Mommy say, 'What are you doing here?' she whispered. Then I heard yelling, and John said, 'Put it down, Dan!' And then I heard the booms." The courtroom was silent. Jurors looked down. Several spectators wept. Lila's testimony was followed by her younger brother Ethan's recorded video deposition. In it, the 8-year-old said he saw Daddy stand by the front door with a gun and that Mommy fell and didn't get up. Despite the defense team's objections, the judge allowed the recordings to stand. The impact was devastating. Daniel's defense attorney, James Colton, faced an uphill battle. With fingerprints, digital evidence, and witness testimony aligning against his client, he leaned heavily on psychological nuance. He portrayed Daniel as a crumbling father pushed to the brink by a flawed legal system they believed was stripping him of his children. This man was not a killer, Colton insisted. He was a desperate parent in emotional freefall, struggling to remain part of his children's lives. They brought in a forensic psychiatrist who testified that Daniel suffered from persistent complex bereavement disorder and intermittent explosive disorder, both of which, he claimed, impaired Daniel's ability to think rationally under stress. But under cross-examination, the psychiatrist admitted that neither diagnosis rendered Daniel incapable of understanding right from wrong. That, prosecutors emphasized, was a line that mattered. Over the next week, the prosecution painted a chilling portrait of a man who believed he owned his family. They read aloud texts Daniel had sent to Sarah in the months before her death. "You think you can erase me with some new guy? You'll see. If I can't have peace, neither can you." They also presented a receipt from a local gun range, proving Daniel had visited just 3 days before the murders. He wasn't just thinking about violence. He was preparing for it. And then came the most damning piece of evidence. A note found on Daniel's computer, unsaved but recovered from temporary files, titled, "Just So You Know." It read like a goodbye letter crossed with a manifesto. "I can't take this anymore. You took my family. You poisoned my kids against me. And now you're replacing me. I won't stand by and let that happen." After 6 days of testimony, 43 witnesses, and over 300 pieces of evidence, the jury deliberated for just 5 hours. On the morning of April 12, 2013, they returned with a unanimous verdict. Guilty on all counts. Daniel Beasley was convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder, 3 counts of child abuse resulting in emotional harm, 1 count of unlawful use of a weapon, 1 count of unlawful entry. During sentencing, Judge Meredith Crane called the crime a devastating act of cowardice and an annihilation of the very family you claim to love. She sentenced Daniel to 2 consecutive life terms without parole and 25 additional years for the child endangerment charges. Daniel showed no emotion, no apology, no tears. He simply stood up, nodded once at his attorney, and walked out courtroom. In the weeks following the trial, Greeley tried to return to normal, but there was no forgetting what had happened. The Beasley children, now living with their Aunt Mia in Fort Collins, began intensive therapy. They were placed in a private school to escape media scrutiny, and a fund, the Beasley Children's Healing Fund, raised over $280,000 in just 6 months. Neighbors, once wary of one another, now looked for signs of distress behind closed doors. Domestic violence awareness programs saw a surge in participation. The local church started hosting monthly support groups for families affected by divorce and custody battles. Sarah and John were buried side by side at Sunset Memorial Gardens, their headstones engraved with the words, "Forever loved, forever missed." As word of the case spread beyond Colorado, news networks picked it up nationally. The story ran under banners like, "Daddy Dearest," the Colorado double murder that shook a town, "When Custody Turns Deadly," inside the Beasley family murders. A killer behind the smile, what everyone missed about Daniel Beasley. CNN's Fatal Families did a full 60-minute documentary. Netflix optioned a scripted miniseries based on the trial transcripts. True crime podcasts broke down the case week by week. But amid the media circus, those closest to Sarah resented the sensationalism. She wasn't just a victim in a story, Mia told Good Morning America. "She was my sister. She was a person who loved fiercely. She protected her kids with everything she had. And John, he was a good man who loved her enough to risk stepping into a complicated life. They both deserve better." Experts began dissecting Daniel's mindset. Dr. Anita Krawczyk, a forensic psychologist not involved in the trial, wrote a paper on the case titled "Possession, Power, and Punishment: The Modern Family Annihilator." She theorized that Daniel fit a distinct pattern, one often overlooked because it wears the mask of paternal concern. "These individuals," she wrote, "are not driven by hatred alone. They are driven by entitlement. Their logic is, if I cannot control the outcome, I will control the destruction." In Daniel's mind, Sarah had broken the contract of motherhood by loving someone else, and in doing so, he saw her and the new partner as threats to his identity. That is what made him lethal. Where are they now? Lila, now a teenager, is reported to be doing well academically and is involved in youth advocacy work around trauma awareness. She has not spoken publicly about the case since her court appearance, but has written essays in school about resilience and justice. Ethan and Noah have adapted to life with their aunt, supported by counseling, extended family, and a close-knit church group. Mia Beasley, Sarah's sister, has become a vocal advocate for custody law reform in Colorado. She helped pass Sarah's Law, a 2016 bill requiring courts to investigate all reports of post-divorce harassment during custody battles. Daniel Bessie is currently serving his sentence at Colorado State Penitentiary, where he remains in protective isolation due to the high-profile nature of his crime. In the final week of her life, Sarah Beasley appeared to be on the cusp of something new. Friends recall her being lighter, more hopeful. The custody battle that had defined so much of her emotional landscape seemed to be settling. John had just spoken to her about moving in full-time. The kids had adjusted well to the new routine. Life, however imperfect, was finally gaining clarity. In a series of texts to her sister Mia, just 2 days before the murder, Sarah wrote, "I think we're finally turning a corner. I'm scared to say it out loud, but I think I'm really happy. But hindsight will reveal what Sarah couldn't see. Daniel wasn't done, and in many ways, he was growing more erratic. One of the most haunting aspects of the Beasley case is the number of red flags that were documented but not acted upon. Between 2010 and 2012, Sarah filed 3 police reports against Daniel for harassment, unwanted surveillance, and 1 instance where he left a threatening note on her windshield. Though each report was taken seriously, none resulted in charges. Detective Elise Romero, who led the investigation, later admitted in an interview, "We had pieces of a puzzle, but no one ever had the full picture. The system isn't built for preemptive intervention, and unfortunately, that gap cost 2 lives." Romero now teaches courses in domestic threat assessment, using the Beasley case as a cautionary model. She believes that Daniel's escalation followed a textbook trajectory, one seen in many cases of coercive control, that end in violence. Interviews with Daniel's college friends and co-workers revealed a man whose mask rarely slipped. In public, he was quiet but charming, articulate but reserved. In private, especially with Sarah, his darker tendencies emerged. He kept a journal, found during a search of his home, in which he wrote about Sarah almost obsessively. "She ruined me, took my light, gave my kids away to that man. If I can't stop it, I will yendi it. I dream sometimes that she cries for help, but I never help her. I just watch." What emerged was not a man who simply snapped, but a man who had been spiraling for years, managing his resentment behind a well-practiced smile. Dr. Louise Harmon, a psychologist specializing in criminal narcissism, offered this analysis. Daniel fits what we call the covert narcissist profile. He isn't flamboyant. He doesn't rage in public. But inside, he seethes at every perceived injustice. These men often view themselves as victims of women who betray them, when in reality, they were never entitled control in the first place. The case struck a chord not just with the public, but with state legislators, many of whom were stunned by the lack of legal options Sarah had prior to her murder. In late 2014, Colorado passed Sarah's Law, named in her honor. It included 3 critical reforms. 1. Mandatory risk screening in family court when prior harassment or stalking is reported. 2. Temporary protective orders can now be issued based solely on harassment, even without physical violence. 3. Judicial discretion to pause or modify custody agreements when a credible threat is determined. This law has since been cited in over 300 family court rulings in Colorado and inspired similar bills in Oregon, Washington, and Illinois. For a long time, Lila, Ethan, and Noah wouldn't talk about that night. Therapists use play therapy, art, and animal-assisted sessions to help them reprocess the trauma in age-appropriate ways. Lila, now in high school, wrote an essay for a regional youth essay competition titled "The Night My Childhood Ended." In it, she described waking up to a scream, running downstairs, and seeing Mommy asleep on the floor but she wasn't breathing. She ended the essay with a haunting reflection. "I don't remember the gun. I remember the silence after. Like the whole house had stopped breathing." Their Aunt Mia has shielded them from the public eye, but shared in a 2017 interview that each child remembers their mother in their own way. Lila clings to her memory. Ethan talks to a picture every night. And Noah, he barely remembers her, which might be the hardest thing of all. True crime analysts and psychologists continue to study the Beasley case not just for its tragedy, but for what it reveals about systemic blind spots. Why wasn't Daniel's obsessive behavior flagged earlier? Why did family court fail to act on Sarah's police reports? Why is emotional and psychological abuse still so poorly understood in legal frameworks? For many, the answer lies in a cultural hesitation to treat non-physical abuse with the same urgency. Sarah was believed but not protected. That distinction, experts argue, cost her and John their lives. In 2018, the University of Denver Center for Family Law published a white paper titled From Harassment to Homicide: Legal Gaps in High-Conflict Custody Cases. The Beasley case was the centerpiece. It concluded with a sobering warning. Absent timely intervention and cross-system collaboration, individuals like Daniel Bessie will continue to weaponize the legal system itself. Without reform, family court may remain the most dangerous place for victims to seek safety. The paper pushed for mandatory training for family court judges in identifying coercive control and expanded authority for child welfare advocates to recommend protective oversight during custody disputes. The ripple effects of the case didn't end with the family. The first responders, too, bore scars. Officer Trey Nichols, who was one of the first on scene, developed PTSD and retired from the force 2 years later. "I still see her. I still hear that little girl on the 911 call," he told a reporter. "We train for active shooters, but nothing prepares you for the look in a child's eyes when her whole world is gone." A support fund was set up for affected officers, and Greeley police implemented trauma debrief protocols to support responders dealing with family homicide scenes. Within a week of Sarah and John's murders, the case had gone national. Headlines in USA Today, CNN, and Dateline NBC framed it as a textbook example of what happens when emotional abuse escalates into physical violence. Social media erupted with hashtags like #JusticeForSarah, #BelieveWomen, and #CoerciveControlKills. Survivors of domestic abuse began sharing their own near-miss stories. Many said they'd seen themselves in Sarah. One viral tweet read, "She did everything right, reported him, documented the threats, fought for custody, and she still died. This system doesn't protect women. It buries them." This pressure prompted hearings in several states about family court reform. Advocates argued that Sarah's story was just one of thousands. Hers simply had a tragic ending the media couldn't ignore. Unfortunately, Sarah Beasley's case is not unique. In analyzing similar crimes, patterns emerge, especially around post-separation violence. 1. Jennifer Magnano, 2007, Connecticut. Jennifer had fled with her children to a domestic violence shelter. A court ordered her to return home to avoid violating custody agreements. Her husband murdered her days later. Like Sarah, she had documented years of emotional abuse. 2. Alyssa Maldonado, 2019, Texas. Killed by her ex-husband just weeks after filing for full custody. He had no prior criminal record, but had made veiled threats. Friends said he just snapped. 3. Courtney Allen, 2022, Georgia. Courtney's death sparked a legislative push in Georgia for coercive control recognition. Her family testified that emotional torment paved the way for lethal violence. What links these cases isn't just brutality. It's a systemic disbelief that often precedes them. Authorities wait for bruises, but by the time those appear, it's often too late. As with many high-profile true crime cases, public opinion quickly divided and exploded online. Reddit threads dissected Daniel's background. TikTok users made mini-documentaries. True crime podcasts did deep dives, while Facebook groups debated whether Sarah provoked him by moving on too quickly. Some of the most disturbing reactions came from men's rights corners of the internet, where Daniel was bizarrely framed as a man pushed too far. These narratives were quickly countered by advocates, highlighting the toxic entitlement at the heart of such beliefs. Psychologist Dr. Genevieve Krantz described it best. These communities reframe violence as reaction, when in truth, it's strategy. Daniel wasn't broken. He was deliberate. That's what makes it terrifying. Still, The case fueled important conversations around digital radicalization, misogynistic grievance culture, and the role of online echo chambers in shaping real-world violence. Though Daniel pleaded guilty, prosecutors had prepared for trial. Their evidence list was extensive, including surveillance logs dating back for years, a draft suicide note in which Daniel wrote he'd die knowing she paid for what she did, cell phone pings showing he had stalked Sarah on her dates with John, voice memos, including one where he muttered, "You think I'm just going to let you win?" The jury would never see those details, but they were entered into the public record. When sentencing came, the judge made sure to read from them, so no one could say this was an act of passion. This was not spontaneous, the judge declared. This was meticulous and monstrous. For many, the guilty plea and life sentence without parole offered a sense of closure. But others, especially advocates, saw it differently. "I'm glad he's behind bars," said Ruth Delgado, founder of Women Rise Up, a Denver-based support group. But this is not justice. Justice would have been Sarah alive, raising her kids. Justice would have been a system that acted on her warnings. That sentiment echoed across survivor networks. The Beasley case became a rallying cry, not because it was an outlier, but because it was so painfully familiar. By 2024, the 10th anniversary of Sarah's murder, the world had changed in many ways, but her family's grief remained steady. Lila, now 17, is an honors student who wants to study psychology and advocate for children in trauma. Ethan, 14, excels in science and robotics. Noah, 12, recently wrote a children's book about heroes who don't wear capes, one of whom is his mom. Mia continues to raise them with a blend of gentleness and resilience. The family still lives in Greeley, though they've moved homes. On the 10th anniversary, Mia posts a message on Sarah's old Facebook page. 10 years ago, we lost you, but every day we still find pieces of you, in laughter, in stubbornness, in courage. You didn't just live. You loved, fiercely, and that's what we remember. In a surprising 2016 interview, Mia was asked if she could ever forgive Daniel. Her answer stunned many. Forgiveness isn't for him. It's for me. I carry too much already. I won't carry hate too. Forgiveness in such cases is rarely about exoneration. It's about liberation from the emotional grip of the abuser. Daniel's punishment is severe. His isolation is absolute. But for Sarah's family, forgiveness is an act of survival, not reconciliation. More than a victim, Sarah Beasley was a mother, a sister, a teacher, and a fighter. Her life was not defined by her death, but by how she lived in spite of fear. She loved fiercely, parented bravely, and sought safety not just for herself, but for her children. She did everything society told her to do. Reported, documented, followed the law, and still it wasn't enough. Her legacy now lives in legislation, in education, and most of all, in the 3 children who survived that horrific night and now carry her name forward with dignity. What do you think? Was justice served, or does this story reveal deeper cracks in the systems meant to protect us? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you believe these stories deserve to be heard, subscribe, like, and share this video, because the more we speak their names, the less likely they are to be forgotten. Stay safe, stay aware, and we'll see you next time on Mystery Crime Vaults.